This
is Doug DeMuro. Doug's built one of the best car channels on YouTube.
And made videos that have millions and millions of views.
And he's leveraged that into a business that every creator dreams of building.
Hoping to connect with those enthusiasts through his own auction website.
He's funny, candid, and he's worked incredibly hard to realize his dreams. Doug's story has lessons for anyone who's been interested in making cool content or even one day starting their own company. And today, I'm going to take you through the quirks and features of this unique creator who broke all the rules. And I promise you, even if you're not into cars, you'll love this. Doug's journey began in his hometown of Denver. He was on a date, and he saw his dream car driving past, a Porsche Carrera GT.
Yeah, I was on my first date ever as a child. And no one believed me that I had seen the car. And so I started carrying around a digital camera everywhere.
Yeah.
And that kind of was like the touchstone of the whole thing.
Seeing the Carrera GT kickstarted Doug's career as a car spotter. He loved it so much and got so good at it that Automobile magazine wrote a profile about him in 2009. By then, Doug was living in Atlanta and studying economics at Emory University. He already knew that he wanted to work in the car industry after graduating, and that's precisely what he did. After college, Doug got a job with Porsche North America as a vehicle allocation manager, making decisions about which dealerships new cars were sent to. At the start, he loved it. He was working in his dream industry, and he got to drive a Porsche 911 as a company car. But pretty soon, Doug realized it wasn't all it was cracked up to be.
I still remember I was working in a cubicle. I was working for Porsche, and that was so cool, but I was working in a cubicle doing Excel spreadsheets, and you pick up your 6911, your 7th, and you're like, is this gonna be the pinnacle of my life? And I just kind of realized I'm 23, I want to try something different.
The straw that broke the camel's back came in December of 2012, when Doug had to go on a business trip to Germany on his wife's birthday. When he got back to the States, he gave his notice. For the first few weeks after leaving Porsche, Doug had no idea what to do. He wasn't fielding tons of job offers from other car makers, but he did have one thing. He'd started writing for a car website called Auto Trader. It wasn't anything special, mostly consumer-focused articles with titles like, "Should you buy at the end of your lease?" But it paid the bills, and Doug really liked it. In early 2013, Doug went to the North American Auto Show in Detroit and wrote about what he saw. He sent the piece to The Truth About Cars, a website which specialized in snarky, clever commentary. He didn't know them, they didn't know him. It was a total shot in the dark, but it worked. People loved it. That piece made Doug really start to believe in his own writing. He told himself, if Top Gear could be funny with cars, why couldn't he? So he started writing regularly for The Truth About Cars. He wasn't getting paid, but he was honing his writing and beginning to build an audience. And soon, another opportunity came up.
Eventually, Jalopnik came out with this thing in the summer of 2013 where you could make your own blog, post one and it would do okay, and they'd maybe post another and another, and eventually they were like, okay, this guy's pretty good, and they started to post a lot of my stuff.
Jalopnik was a big breakthrough for Doug. Not financially, but it was by far the biggest car blog on the internet. There's a lot of bad car writing out there, done by people who are just SEO hacking. But Doug was like a breath of fresh air. His articles were funny, they had tons of personality. They helped him build an audience, and one of Doug's readers was about to change his life.
End of 2013 comes along and I get an email from a reader and he says, you're a very funny writer, you should try making videos. The concept had never even crossed my mind.
So Doug decided it was time to make his first video. He knew that most people's first videos were kind of crappy, but he didn't want to do that. If he was going to make videos, he wanted them to be good straight away. Doug's first video was a farewell to his Cadillac station wagon.
I spent a week filming this video. It's like 6 minutes long. I still remember I spent $500 to rent props. Eventually that video went up and actually it was pretty good. And I still watch that video today and you can see I would change this, I would change that, but it's not so terrible.
From the very start, Doug took a totally different approach from other car reviewers. At the time, most reviewers just focused on how the car drove. It made for a pretty flat experience. But Doug was just so passionate about cars, and he had a knack for sharing that enthusiasm in a really genuine and relatable way. But it was still an incredibly long way from one charming, scrappy video to 4.5 million subscribers. He needed a hook.
So I bought a Ferrari 360, but now I have to get it home. The problem is the Ferrari is located here.
The story of how Doug ended up buying a secondhand Ferrari 360 is pretty crazy. He only had half the money, and no one wanted to lend money to a guy who didn't have a job. So his parents had to co-sign the loan for the rest. And when he bought it, he had to drive it from Florida back home to Atlanta. He was taking a big risk. But it paid off. Today, tons of people make videos featuring exotic cars. But back when Doug was getting started, he was the only YouTuber with a Ferrari. And Doug didn't just make one video with the Ferrari, he made almost 20. He took it drag racing. He made videos about how challenging it was to do things like run errands and get gas. He even let a bunch of his friends and some strangers test drive it. It was an audacious strategy, but it was successful. Doug's Ferrari videos got hundreds of thousands of views and helped establish his channel. And yet, despite how much of a hassle it was for him to make all of those videos, let alone buy the Ferrari in the first place, he still considered him a writer who was just making videos on the side.
Didn't even think for a second that you could make money on YouTube, that I would do this, that this would be a thing. I had bought a Skyline GTR and a Hummer that year to write about, and I was looking at the numbers for my articles, and I was like, the articles just aren't as popular. And then I still remember, I clicked over to my YouTube, and the YouTube videos were getting twice as many views as the articles, or 3 times as many. I was like, okay.
In fact, he thought he'd eventually get serious and go to law school. Doug moved to Philadelphia, but the channel was gaining momentum. Doug began to get an interesting thought. Maybe this YouTube thing was legit, but he still had doubts. Back then, not many people were making a living from YouTube. And to make things even more complicated, new creators were making videos with really exotic cars. Doug knew that if he didn't change up his strategy, he'd be left behind. Maybe he'd have to go back to law school after all. So he started mixing it up. He made a video where he crushed a PT Cruiser with a Hummer. Another video where he reviewed his friend's Land Rover got almost 2 million views. Doug learned quickly that variety was the key to keeping things fresh. He bought an Aston Martin V8 Vantage. It wasn't the most exciting car in the world.
But I bought it because I was able to get this car with an unlimited mileage, bumper-to-bumper warranty.
So Doug figured there was scope to make some cool content with it. He took the Aston Martin on an adventure, and that adventure helped him realize something truly important.
I drove my Aston Martin across the country and back, from Philadelphia to California and back in 2016, and I hosted meetups. And I remember I did a meetup in Boise, Idaho, and I bought from a grocery store, a dozen cookies. I was like, me and the 4 people who show up will eat these things. Well, 50 people showed up, and I was like, uh-oh, because the rest of the meetups I had scheduled in big cities. The biggest moment for me was in Minneapolis. We showed up at the site, the cops kicked us out, went to a completely different site. It was just ridiculous. And still, hundreds of people showed up. The Oscar Mayer Wienermobile showed up, and that was the night when I knew that I didn't have to just worry about, oh, one day am I gonna have to quit this and do some real job.
Just 3 years after quitting his real job, Doug was getting millions of views on YouTube. The Aston Martin provided him with enough content to publish a book, and he was building a loyal audience of people who loved his content. It was a really exciting time. In the summer of 2016, Autotrader.com asked Doug to be the editor of their new Oversteer blog. In hindsight, it probably wasn't great value for him. Doug's videos were doing better numbers than his articles, and taking on new responsibilities like managing writers was kind of orthogonal to making content. But he just loved writing and figured that editing a blog would provide him with more video ideas. So he said yes. And around the same time, he also said yes to his first brand deal.
Now, I've rented this Ghibli here in Nashville, Tennessee, using a service called Turo, which is this cool company that's sort of like Airbnb for cars. Turo has given me a budget to rent cars, and I decided to rent this one because Turo is really the best way to experience the Ghibli.
On paper, this looked like a great fit. Partnering with Turo let Doug review a wider range of cars, which he'd already identified as the strategy to keep growing his channel. This deal was what let him review the first-generation Tesla Model X, which remains one of his most popular videos to this day. But it was risky. If you're a creator whose appeal is based on your knowledge and charisma, then building trust with your audience is crucial. That trust takes years to build, but it's really easy to lose. Doug avoided that outcome by continuing to make content you couldn't find anywhere else. As his channel got more popular, he was able to get his hands on more interesting cars, like the Bugatti Chiron and the bizarre and ancient BMW Isetta. And he wouldn't just read out their specs, he'd go through each and every quirk and feature, often in great detail. Watching Doug's videos would teach you things you'd never get from just reading about a car in a magazine. And they were always entertaining.
I think one of the reasons my channel was successful is because I was able to appeal to non-car enthusiasts because of my format. So I have a video titled, "Here's Why the Rolls-Royce Phantom is Worth $600,000. You don't have to be into cars to be like, why the hell would someone pay $600,000? And then you get in there and you're seeing there's power operated curtains over the windows. And that is good content regardless of like who you are and what you're interested in.
Doug was perfecting the art of making videos that piqued the curiosity of people who weren't really into cars while still satisfying purists. And he was learning new ways to keep his viewers engaged. On a trip to New Jersey, Doug and his wife came up with the concept of the Doug Score. Basically, the Doug Score judges a car in 10 separate categories split across 2 separate groups. Weekend, which measures the car's appeal to enthusiasts, and Daily, which focuses on the car's practicality. The Doug Score is great. Not only did it give Doug a way to compare all the different cars he'd reviewed, it gave his fans something to argue about. It's no surprise that lots of people skip right to the end of his videos just to see the Doug Score. With a couple of new features under his belt, Doug knew it was time to double down. He started posting 2 videos a week. In December of 2016, he made $20,000. He was reviewing cool vehicles and getting his subscribers to send in their own interesting cars. The flywheel had started spinning, and Doug was about to get that mainstream recognition that every car enthusiast dreams of.
Today we're with Doug DeMuro. Now, Doug, if you don't know him, big car guy. He lives cars, he breathes cars. Are you ready to play?
Yeah, let's do it. All right.
Put that on.
This thing on. This is the blindfold.
Okay, I'm gonna turn you around here.
All right, this is great. This is my first time in Jay Leno's garage and I can't see anything.
Doing a video with Jay Leno was a huge turning point for Doug. It gave him massive credibility while exposing him to a new cohort, car guys who weren't on YouTube, and it led directly to a major milestone.
This is 1 million subscribers. I released my first video just over 4 years ago, and I can't believe I've reached 1 million subscribers.
Doug had made it. He'd become the best car YouTuber around, just by being himself. But he knew better than anyone that YouTube was fickle. Sure, he was doing great for now, but things could change so quickly. He'd built a big, loyal audience, and now he started thinking about how to use that audience to help secure his family's future.
The ideas started to form in early 19, spring of 19. YouTube was not going to work forever. Someday the algorithm maybe wouldn't, you don't have much control when you're a YouTuber. And so it hit me that like, I got to take the audience and bring them somewhere that I can do monetize and that I can turn into a real business.
One of the perks of being a popular YouTuber was that people would often write to Doug asking to hang out. That came in handy whenever he moved to a new city. One day, after Doug and his wife had moved to California, Doug got an email from a guy named Blake Machado. Blake was an experienced software entrepreneur who'd successfully raised millions of dollars from Bessemer and Google Ventures. The two decided to grab dinner and talk about business opportunities. Doug knew from personal experience that people who loved cars also loved buying and selling them. And he also knew that, aside from Bring a Trailer, there weren't many places where people could reliably buy and sell rare cars. So Doug and Blake decided to create an online marketplace for rare cars. Doug handled the strategy while Blake built the site. Everything seemed to be going great. There was just one problem.
Fast-breaking developments.
Coronavirus pandemic spreads.
The number of cases soaring. 2020 is now the deadliest year in U.S. history.
It looked like the COVID pandemic was a terrible time to start an online car auction website. People weren't out driving cars. They were stuck at home. And they wouldn't spend money on fancy cars. They were worried about losing their jobs. But as it turned out, Doug was wrong. The pandemic was actually the perfect time to launch. The US government pumped trillions of dollars of stimulus into the economy in order to prevent a recession. And interest rates were on the floor, so it was easy to get financing.
Actually, we launched into the greatest car market in the history of the automobiles.
The economic conditions helped Cars and Bids take off pretty much right away. Since its launch, it's sold almost $250 million worth of cars across more than 10,000 auctions. The site gets more than 1 million users every month. Numbers like that caught the attention of the Churning Group, an investment firm which specializes in creator-led businesses. And in February of 2023, the Churning Group paid $37 million for a majority stake in Cars and Bids. It was the culmination of a journey that had started with Doug getting paid $25 to write blogs and ended with him getting millions of dollars for building an incredible business. A business that was only possible because of his massively successful YouTube channel. It's a beautiful story, and it's a fascinating business case study. Doug must have really been paying attention in his economics classes at Emory, because he's done a great job of applying some fundamental principles to Cars and Bids. The first one is product market fit, or the creator equivalent.
You don't have to change your videos to incorporate your business or what you're selling. That is incredibly unique for the creator space.
There's a finance YouTuber named Graham Stephan who has about as many subscribers as Doug, but Graham decided to start a coffee company. It never really made any sense since he talks about business and finance, not coffee, and he's only mentioned it a couple times on his channel. Compare that to what Doug did. He spent years building trust by talking about cars. He then leveraged that trust by building a business that lets people buy and sell cars. In his videos, which are about cars, he promotes cars and bids. And he can review cars that are on the website in order to generate more interest in the auction. There's almost no marketing costs involved, nothing feels weird, and it's all just perfectly aligned. If you watch my videos, you're probably familiar with the concept of zero marginal costs. It's fundamental to software. Making one more copy of a product basically costs nothing. Cars and Bids works on the same principle. There's no incremental cost to the website for listing another car. It's all just software code that runs continuously. And for the same reason, expanding to markets beyond the United States will be really cheap. All they need to do is translate the website. And in fact, every new car that's on the site gives people more reasons to visit the site. So not only are the marginal costs absolutely tiny, they're smaller than the marginal benefit. If you've been following the creator news, you've probably seen that Mr. Beast might be shutting down Beast Burger. It's a really unfortunate situation, but it kind of makes sense. Ghost kitchens are a risky business model because there are so many links in the chain. You need the supply chains to work properly, the kitchen staff to cook the food, and the delivery staff to actually deliver the food to the customers. Not only do all of those need to work, but they all need to get paid. With Cars and Bids, the value accrues more directly to the company. The audience took years to cultivate, and the website cost money to build, but now that those pieces are in place, the company can capture all of the value. They don't have to pay other suppliers to make the system work.
I met Jerry Seinfeld like a year ago, and Jerry tells me, I watched all your videos, and I'm like, do you like Porsches?
Doug's talking about Jerry Seinfeld here. Next to Jay Leno, he's probably the most famous car collector on earth. And if Jerry Seinfeld goes and buys a car on Cars and Bids, he will generate more profit for Doug than a regular person would. The reason is a concept called price discrimination. Let me explain. Listing a car on Cars and Bids is free, and the seller gets 100% of the sale price. But buyers pay a 4.5% commission up to $4,500. So the more expensive the car, the more money Cars and Bids makes. Price discrimination is really powerful because it means you're able to extract more money from your richer customers. It's the concept that underpins microtransactions in gaming. Rather than getting a flat $60 out of everyone, developers built a way to make more money out of superfans. Most creators only ever really scratch the surface of price discrimination with things like tiered subscriptions. But Doug has naturally built it into the core of Cars and Bids. So, what can creators learn from Doug? That patience, authenticity, and decency are virtues. Once you build an audience, you don't have to rush to squeeze as much money out of them as possible. It's a long game. Wait for the perfect pitch and then swing hard. What about non-creators? What can they learn? Honestly, I think the main lesson here is that Cars and Bids is a great way to learn important business concepts. Compare it to Apple. Apple is the world's biggest company, but it took 50 years and billions of dollars to become the company that it is today. You can't just copy its formula for success. But in his own words, Doug is just a guy. You can look at how he's built demand, achieved perfect product market fit, and leveraged price discrimination and apply it to your own situation. I'm not saying it's easy. Doug says it's harder to get started on YouTube today than 10 years ago. But if you have the knowledge, the passion, and the work ethic, you can do it. Doug DeMuro is proof that sometimes the good guys do finish first. He's never been a ruthless business person. He's always just loved cars. And he's found an incredible way to share that passion with other people. His story is full of inspiring lessons for creators and non-creators alike, and I can't wait to see what he does next. I love talking about unique creators and what makes them successful. To learn why billionaires love Mr. Beast, watch this video next. Thanks a lot.